And then, of course, there's James Comey, the former FBI director who has long been the target of Trump's ire. By now, you've probably seen this relatively benign social media post from Comey, a photo of seashells he came across on the beach, spelling out 8647. The Trump administration deemed that post a threat against Trump's life. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard called for Comey to be jailed over it. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem dispatched Secret Service agents to interview Comey about the alleged threat. Look, the good news is that when institutions push back against Trump's threats, in many cases, they win. They've been winning lately. Harvard pushed back today and they won. So far, 4 law firms have pushed back against him, and those 4 law firms are undefeated against him in court. But for these individual people, getting targeted and investigated by the President of the United States is no small thing. So how should they react when Trump uses the power of his office to go after his opponents like this? Well, I have just the person to ask. Joining me now is former FBI Director James Comey. He's the author of a brand new novel, his third, FDR Drive, and we'll talk about that too. It's great to see you. Let me just start by asking you. I mean, I mentioned you've talked about this controversy over the social media post. I mentioned it. You willingly met with Secret Service officials. Is it over now? Have they told you it's over, or do you expect they're going to try to continue it and try to keep investigating you in some capacity?
I expect it'll go away because there's nothing there, and then Trump will wake up in the middle of the night, truthing or whatever it's called about me, because he's obsessed in some weird way. But for me, the people you listed are people who haven't been through it before like I have. Unfortunately, I have lots of experience with this. I take a Chris Krebs. That's a guy you've never heard of being targeted by an executive order of the president saying you shall be investigated. That's life-altering.
What should they, I don't know if you've been in touch with Chris Krebs or any of these people. What should they be doing? There are people who are even less famous than Chris Krebs and Miles Taylor who will be targeted. What should they do when they're targeted?
Probably 2 things I've learned to do with these kind of threats at the same time that seem contradictory. First, see it clearly. Understand that there really is a threat. Second, don't let it overwhelm you. Don't give them that. Don't let it freak you out and dominate your life. Take prudent steps, but don't give it. The part of the roar of Trump is to freak out his victims, the people he targets. So don't give them that. But don't neglect the threat. Protect yourself.
You're promoting a book, which we'll talk about that, and you've had to respond to these questions about the seashells. But you could choose to not be out there publicly and talking about these issues. Why have you chosen to be out there?
I was actually, and I'm embarrassed to say, trying to withdraw a little bit, especially since last November. Be a grandfather, be an author, wear T-shirts and jeans all the time. And the reason I'm dressed in my old uniform is to remind myself that's the coward's way. You must stand up and speak. Everyone who can speak, I can speak about the rule of law especially, needs to be out there because there are real serious threats. And the only thing that's necessary for them to triumph is for good men and women to be silent.
One of the challenges, there's many right now, but one of the challenges I've found is that there's so many things happening every single day. Sometimes you lose the thread on different stories that are important to focus on and talk about. And since you are the former FBI director, I wanted to ask you about some of the things going on there. I mean, Kash Patel, I think, was quite a choice, is one diplomatic way of saying it. He's reportedly been spending a lot of time in Vegas and other places, which I saw you say recently. Maybe that's a good thing. What do you make of the job he's doing so far, and what concerns you the most about it?
Hard to tell for sure from the outside. Obviously, you start with the fact that the guy has literally nothing in his entire adult life that prepares him for this role. And so that's deeply concerning to start with. In a way, I kind of feel a little bit sorry for the guy. He's barked at the FBI nonsense for years, and now he not only caught the car, he's got to drive the car. And so that is a daunting task for him. I hope he lets the career people do their jobs, but they've already forced out a bunch of good career people and sent a chill through the organization. I hear they're moving lots of resources. I don't know how they're doing that, given that the FBI has long decided how to deploy its resources with a process that ranks the threats and puts resources against the threats with terrorism and counterintelligence at the top of that stack. And if you're going to make a change, you have to go ask Congress, in my experience, because they make the law. So I'm a little confused when I hear announcements about moving thousands of people here or changing priorities there.
We don't know. There's not a lot of transparency into what exactly is happening.
That's right.
To your point, I mean, Patel and his number 2, Dan Bongino, have recently come under fire from MAGA world, I guess you could call it, for exposing the so-called deep state plots. I mean, I guess they haven't done enough in their view, is why they've come under fire. It seems like that might be influence from it's hard to know, but what do you make of that? Because he was in many ways the choice of the MAGA world, and now they seem to be a little mad at him.
Well, because he's found himself now in a reality-based world where statements have to be under oath in front of judges and there's severe consequences for lying. Not the case with a podcast. And so that's what I meant when I say he has to drive the car now. Of course he's going to disappoint the people he gave that nonsense to for years, because the FBI, newsflash, is not a left-wing cabal of deep staters. It's a fundamentally honest group of people trying to figure out what's true. He now sees that. He has to say that. And the people who follow him are going to find that very disappointing.
One of the other trends we've seen is, you mentioned this, is a dismantling. Some of it we see publicly, some of it we just hear about. One of the things we've seen recently is the dismantling of the Office of Public Integrity, which historically, typically, if people are going to, from the part of the Justice Department, it's the part of the Justice Department supposed to make sure prosecutions of lawmakers aren't political. What do you make of the dismantling of that? They've cut staff, they've tried to cut their role. What does that mean? What should people understand about it?
Well, these are the people who, through decades and decades, have seen every kind of case. And so they're there to make sure that the work, no matter who's in charge in the White House, no matter who the Attorney General is, that the work is done consistently with previous practice and consistent with the law. I know Republicans these days aren't big in thinking about principle or precedent. They're going to be deeply sorry that that disappears, because someday there will be a Democratic president and there'll be investigations of Republican office holders. If I'm them, I sure would want these career people in place, making sure that it's done in the right way. Look, I've long thought that you could shrink the size of some of the Department of Justice headquarters units, but this is like burning down the house and then standing in front of the pile of ashes and saying, yeah, we really did need to retile the guest bath, right? This is destroying the place at a cost that's going to take years and years to rebuild.
What does that rebuilding look like? I mean, we're only a couple of months in, so it's almost hard to know what it would look like. But at this point, you're talking about dismantling the Office of Public Integrity. FBI field offices may or may not have been underfunded and dismantled. What does the rebuilding look like?
It'll take principled leadership that, in a transparent, logical way, figures out what resources need to be where. It'll happen quickly. The good news is we're going to go through 3+ years of real pain. Innocent people are going to be hurt, forced out of these organizations. Dumber decisions are going to be made because the talent drained away. But it'll come back very quickly and be rebuilt very quickly. These characters are not going to change the Department of Justice or the FBI in any fundamental way. You don't change culture by shouting at it or cursing it. You maintain an organization by bringing in talented people. They'll come back.
Trump's budget bill, which passed the first step this week, as you well know, has many more steps to go, but it would allocate huge sums of money to immigration enforcement. Some experts say it would make ICE the biggest law enforcement agency in the country by funding it bigger than the FBI. What do you think about that?
I sure hope they're keeping their eye on the top threats on the FBI stack, that they're keeping their eye on the terrorism threat, cyber threat, also the counterintelligence threat. Those things are not going to go away, no matter how much you talk about immigration enforcement, and God help us if we lose sight of those.